The Beasts of Barsac by Robert Bloch. It was twilight when Dr. Jerome reached the ogre's castle. He moved through the fairy-tale land of a child's picture book, a realm of towering mountain crags, steeply slanting roads, ascending to forbidden heights, clouds that hovered like bearded wraiths, watching his progress from on high. The castle itself was built of dream stuff. Nightmare qualities predominated in the great grey bulk, rearing its crumbling battlements against a sudden blood-streaked sky. A chill wind sang its weird welcome as Dr. Jerome advanced toward the castle on the hilltop, and an autumn moon rose above the topmost tower. As the moon stared down on man and castle alike, a black cloud burst from the ruined battlements and soared squeaking to the sky. Bats, of course, the final touch of fantasy. Dr. Jerome shrugged and trudged across weed-choked flagstones in the castle courtyard until he reached the great oaken door. Now to raise the iron knocker. The door would swing open slowly on creaking hinges. The tall, gaunt figure would emerge. "Greetings, stranger. I am Count Dracula." Dr. Jerome grinned. "Like hell," he muttered. For the whole fantasy collapsed when he thought of Sebastian Barsac. This might be an ogre's castle, but Barsac was no ogre. 9 years ago, at the Sorbonne, he'd made friends with shy, fat little Barsac. Since then, they had taken different paths, but it was impossible for Dr. Jerome to imagine his old companion as the ideal tenant of a haunted castle. Not that Barsac didn't have some queer ideas. He'd always been a little eccentric, and his theories on biological research were far from orthodox, but Jerome could bank on one thing. Barsac was too fat to be a vampire and too indolent to become a werewolf. Still, there was something strange about this invitation, coming after a 3 years' lapse in correspondence. Merely a scribbled note suggesting that Dr. Jerome come down for a month or so to look over experimental data, but that was Barsac's usual way of doing things. Ordinarily, Dr. Jerome would ignore such a casual offer, but right now it came as a lifesaver, for Dr. Jerome was strapped. He'd been let out of the foundation, he owed 3 installments on his rent, and he had, literally, no place to lay his head. By pawning the remnants of his precious equipment, he'd managed to cross the channel and reach Castle Barsac. A month in a real castle with his old friend, it might lead to something. So Jerome had a seized opportunity before the echo of its knocking had died away, and now he banged the iron knocker, watched the castle door swing open. It did squeak a bit. Footsteps, a shadow, and then, "Delighted to see you." Sebastian Barsac embraced his friend in the French fashion and began to make Gallic noises of enthusiasm. "Welcome to Castle Barsac," said the little man. "You are tired after your long march from the railroad station, no? I will show you to your room. Servants I do not retain. And after a shower we shall talk, yes?" Up the winding stairs, pursued by a babble of incoherent conversation, Dr. Jerome toiled, bags in hand. He found his oak-paneled chambers, was instructed in the mysteries of the antique mechanical shower arrangement, then was left to bathe and dress. He had no time to marshal his impressions. It was not until later, after a surprisingly good dinner in a small apartment downstairs, that Jerome was able to sit back and appraise his host. They retired to a parlor, lit cigars, and sat back before the grateful warmth emanating from the stone fireplace, where a blaze rose to push back the shadows in the room. Dr. Jerome's fatigue had lifted, and he felt stimulated, alert. As Sebastian Barsac began to discuss his recent work, Jerome took the opportunity to scrutinize his friend. Little Barsac had aged, definitely. He was fat, but flabby rather than roly-poly. The dark hair had receded on his domed forehead, and his myopic eyes peered from spectacles of increased thickness. Despite verbal enthusiasm, the little lord of Castle Barsac seemed oddly languid in his physical movements. But from his talk, Dr. Jerome recognized that Barsac's spirit was unchanged. The words began to form a pattern in Jerome's mind, a pattern holding a meaning he did not understand. "So you can see what I have been doing these 9 years past. All of my life since I left the Sorbonne have been devoted to one end, discovering the linkage between man and animal through the alteration of cell structure in the brain. It is an evolutionary process wherein the cycle occurs in the lifespan of the individual animal. And my key is simple. It lies in the recognition of one fact, that the human soul is divisible." "What is all this?" Dr. Jerome interrupted. "I don't see what you're driving at, Barsac. Where's the connection between biology, alteration of cell structure in the brain, and evolution? And what part does a divisible human soul play in all this?" "I will be blunt, my friend. I believe that human characteristics can be transferred to animals by means of mechanical hypnosis. I believe that portions of the human soul essence, or psyche, can be transmitted from man to animal, and that the animal will then begin to ascend the evolutionary scale. In a word, the animal will show human characteristics." Dr. Jerome scowled. "In the 9 years that you've been dabbling in this unscientific romanticism here in your castle retreat, a new word has come into being to describe your kind, Barsac," he said. "The word is kinky. And that's what I think of you, and that's what I think of your theory." "Theory?" Barsac smiled. "It is more than a theory." "It's preposterous," Jerome interrupted. "To begin with, your statement about the human soul being divisible. I defy you to show me a human soul, let alone prove that you can cut it in half." "I cannot show you one, I grant," said Barsac. "Then what about your mechanical hypnosis? I've never heard it explained." "I cannot explain it." "And what, in an animal, are human characteristics? What is your basis of measurement?" "I do not know." "Then how do you expect me to understand your ideas?" Sebastian Barsac rose. His face was pale, despite the fire's ruddy glow. "I cannot show you a human soul," he murmured, "but I can show you what happens to animals when they possess part of one. I cannot explain mechanical hypnosis, but I can show you the machine I use to hypnotize myself and the animals in order to transfer a portion of my soul. I cannot measure the human characteristics of the animals undergoing my treatment, but I can show you what they look like and let you judge. Even then, you may not understand my ideas, but you will see that I am actually carrying them out." By this time, Dr. Jerome had risen to his feet. "You mean you've been transferring your soul to an animal body?" Sebastian Barsac shrugged. "I have been transferring part of what I call my soul to the bodies of many animals," he amended. "But you can't. It's biologically impossible. It defies the laws of reality." Behind the bulging spectacles, Barsac's eyes gleamed oddly. "What is reality, and who makes its laws?" he mocked. "Come and see for yourself the success of my experiments." He led the way across the chamber, down the hall, and up the great circular staircase. They reached the second floor, on which Jerome's room lay, but did not pause. Selecting a panel switch from the open box on the wall, Barsac threw it and illumined the upper stairs. They began to climb again. And all the while, Barsac was talking. "You have seen the gods of ancient Egypt," he said, "the anthropomorphic stone figures with the bodies of men and the heads of animals. You have heard the legend of the werewolf, of lycanthropic changes whereby man becomes beast and beast becomes man. Fables, all fables, and yet behind the fables lurked a truth. The truth lurks no longer, for I have found it. The seat of evolution lies in the soul, and in the soul's human instrument of expression, the brain. We have grafted cellular structures of one body onto another. Why not graft portions of one soul to another? Hypnosis is the key to transference, as I have said. All this I have learned by much thought, much experimentation. I have worked for 9 years, perfecting techniques and methodology. Many times I failed. To my laboratory I had brought animals, hundreds of animals. Many of them died. I procured others, working endlessly toward one goal. I have paid the price, myself, dying 1,000 mental deaths with the failure of each mistaken attempt. Even a physical price I have paid. A monkey, sans cochon, took from me my finger. So. Barsac paused and held up his left hand in a dramatic gesture to reveal the stump where his left thumb was missing. Then he smiled. But it is not my wounds of battle I wish to display to you. It is the fruits of victory. Come. They had reached the topmost tower at last. Dr. Jerome gazed down the dizzying spiral of the stairs they had ascended, then turned his head forward as Barsac unlocked the paneled door of his laboratory and gestured him inside. The click of a wall switch heralded the coming light. Dr. Jerome entered and stood dazzled in the doorway. Set in the mouldering tower of the old castle was a spacious, white-tiled, completely modern laboratory unit. A great outer room, filled with electrical equipment, was displayed before him. All the appurtenances necessary to microbiology were arranged on shelves and cabinets. "Does it please you, Jerome?" asked Barsac. "It was not easy to assemble this, no. The very tiles were transported up the steep mountain pathways to the castle, and the shipping of each bit of equipment was costly. But behold, is it not a perfect spot in which to work?" Dr. Jerome nodded absently. His inward thoughts were tinged with definite envy. Barsac here was squandering his genius and his wealth on this crazy dabbling, and he had every scientific luxury at his command, while he, Jerome, a capable scientist with a sound outlook, had nothing. No job, no future, nothing to work with. It wasn't right, it wasn't just, and yet... "Even an electrical plant," Barsac was exclaiming. "We manufacture our own power here, you see. Look around. All is of the finest. Or perhaps you are eager to see what I promised to show you." Dr. Jerome nodded again. He couldn't stand the sight of this spotless laboratory because of the jealousy it aroused. He wanted to get it over with, get out of here. Now Barsac opened the door of a second room beyond. It was nearly as large as the first, but the walls were untiled. The original castle stones lent startling contrast to the great gleaming metal cabinet which dominated the center of the chamber. "This room I had not the heart to change," Barsac explained. "It is here, according to family tradition, that my great-great-grandfather conducted his experiments in alchemy. He was a sorcerer." "So is his great-great-grandson," Dr. Jerome murmured. "You refer to the machine." Barsac stepped over and opened the metal door in the side of the cabinet. Within the large exposed area was a chair, fastened with clamps, from which led a number of convoluted tubes and metal valves, which in turn were fastened to a switchboard bearing an imposing number of dials and levers. The chair faced a glass prism, a window in the metal that had the general appearance of a gigantic lens. Before this prism was a wheel of radiating wires, so fine as to be almost transparent. Various tubes from the chair led to the tips of the wires at different points of the wheel rim. "This is not magic, but science," Barsac said. "You see before you the mechanical hypnotic device I've perfected. The human subject is seated in the chair, so. The attachments are made, the adjustments calculated. The cabinet is closed. The power is turned on, to be automatically generated for a time span set beforehand. The subject gazes into the prism. The wires before the prism revolve, and various arcs are actuated across its surface. Mechanical hypnosis results. And then, by means of electrical impulse, something of the life essence, the soul itself, is released. It flows through the glass prism, a vital force, and impinges upon the animal subjects set before the cabinet in the focal range of the glass. The animals receive the essence and change. The transference is complete. Something of the human goes into the animals. By graduating the focal range, I can work with a dozen animals at once. Naturally, each experiment drains my strength and it taxes my vitality. It taxes my credulity, Dr. Jerome interjected. Barsac shrugged dolefully. Very well, I could explain minutely the workings of my machine, but I see you demand visual proof of its work. Come with me. The third door was opened, and Dr. Jerome stood in the last chamber. It was hot in here, and a sharp scent smote his nostrils. An animal reek permeated the bare room. Lining the walls were cages, dozens of cages. Some held rats, some white mice, and there was tier upon tier of glass containers housing guinea pigs. Rats squealed, mice squeaked, and guinea pigs chittered. Experimental subjects, Barsac commented. Alas, the supply is continuously being exhausted. I work on batches of 20 or more at once. You see, not all animals are responsive to the treatment. Out of one batch, I can hope for 2 or 3 reactions. That is, until recently. Then I began to find that almost all of my subjects showed changes. Barsac moved toward the fourth wall, where no cages loomed. Here were shelves filled with jars, preserving jars, Dr. Jerome decided. He moved closer for another look, but Barsac turned. He halted him, left hand on Jerome's shoulder, so that Dr. Jerome looked down upon the trembling stump where the thumb had been. I shall only permit you to gaze upon the last experiments, Barsac whispered. I could show you dogs with human legs, mice with human skulls and no tails, monkeys that are hairless and possessed of human faces. But you would mock at me and say they were freak hybrids, or tell me I could produce monstrosities by using infrared or gamma rays. So I shall show you my last experimental results only, the ones that prove not only that human characteristics can be transferred to animals, but that my characteristics have been transferred. The transference of my mental powers cannot be measured. I shall let you judge the physical results only. Perhaps they will not excite you very much, these creatures of mine. They are not as grotesque as the earlier ones, but the reproduction of an exact characteristic excites me more than the semi-anthropomorphic structures in the earlier bodies. It shows me that I am on the right track at last. My next step will produce not creatures that are changed and dead, but creatures changed and living. Show me, Dr. Jerome commanded. You will not be impressed, Barsac insisted. They are only rats, and you may not even notice. Show me! Then look. Barsac stepped aside, and Dr. Jerome gazed down at the jars. The bodies of 20 rats floated in the preserving fluid. Jerome stared. They were rats, and only rats. Their dead gray bodies were unchanged. Barsac was mad, quite mad. And then Dr. Jerome saw it. He stared at one rat and saw the left forepaw that was not a forepaw, but a tiny hand. He stared at the other rats in the other jars and saw that each left forepaw was alike. Each forepaw was like a human hand, like the left hand of Sebastian Barsac, on which the thumb was missing. Something was climbing the ivy outside the castle walls. Something was peering through the castle window, peering with little red-rimmed eyes that held a light of gleeful and atrocious floating. Something chuckled as it scrambled through the open window and dropped to the floor of the castle bedroom on tiny paws, paws that scraped and patted as they advanced toward the great bed. Suddenly, Jerome felt it crawling up the counterpane. He writhed and twisted, striking out with his hands to dislodge it, but the creature crawled upward, and now he could hear it chuckling in a voice that was a shrill mockery of human laughter. Then its head rose on a level with Jerome's eyes, and he saw it, saw the furry figure, the monkey-like body, and the mannequin head of a witch's familiar, saw and recognized the hideous little monster for what it was, an animal, but with Barsac's face. He screamed then, and knew without any further indication that the creature was not alone. The room was full of them. They were crawling out of the shadows in the corners. They were creeping along the paneling of the walls. They crowded through the door and slithered through rat-holes in the worm-riddled flooring. They were all about him now, chattering and squealing as they climbed toward him. Then through the door came the man-sized figures with the shaggy bodies and flaming eyes, and the acrid scent of the werewolf seeping forth from between their carrion fangs. And beneath their shaggy bodies was the flesh and form of Barsac, and within their flaming eyes was the laughing gaze of Barsac. And Jerome recognized them for what they were, and screamed again. But screaming did not stop them. Nothing stopped them as the mannequin horde and the wolf horde flowed in a furry flood toward his writhing body on the bed. He felt the touch of their horrid paws everywhere, tensed himself for the moment when he would feel their claws, their jaws. A shriek wrenched from his throat as Jerome sat bolt upright in bed. Moonlight streamed tranquilly through the castle window, and its bright pattern was etched upon a bare floor and unshadowed walls. The creatures were gone. They had never existed, save in his own disordered dreams. Dr. Jerome sighed and dropped back as the hot perspiration trickled down into his eyes. He drifted off to sleep again. It seemed to him as though the oaken door opened as he slept, and Barsac crept into the room. The little fat man was smiling a secret smile as he advanced on the bed. In his arms he held a rabbit, a white rabbit. He stroked the furry head until the ears lay flat and the pink-rimmed eyes were open and alert. Then Barsac's eyes opened, and he gazed on Jerome, and he fixed Jerome's gaze with unshakable intensity. Barsac's bulging eyes held a command and a ghastly promise, and Jerome could not turn away. Barsac's very being seemed concentrated in his eyes, and as he stared, Jerome felt his own being rise to meet that ghastly gaze. He felt himself flowing out, and somehow he knew that he was no longer staring at Barsac, but at the white rabbit. The white rabbit was absorbing his personality through the hypnotic stare. Jerome felt weak, giddy. His head reeled, and through a blurred mist he saw the figure of the white rabbit. The white rabbit was growing. The furry body was larger. It slipped out of Barsac's hands and crouched on the floor, looming upwards as it swelled and grew. Its long white ears were melting into a skull that in itself was changing. The pink muzzle blended back into the face. The rabbit's eyes were moving farther apart, and a mouth sprang into prominence above a suddenly protruding chin. There was something terribly familiar about the rabbit's face. Jerome strove to cleanse his mind of loathing and concentrate upon recognition. He had seen that face before, and he knew that he must remember whose it was. Then, in a wave of supreme terror, he recognized the face upon the rabbit. It was his own. Dr. Jerome didn't tell Barsac about his dreams, but Barsac must have noted his pallor and the dark pouches under his eyes and had drawn his own conclusions. "I fear my accommodations are not of the best," he said over the breakfast table. "It is my hope that you will soon become accustomed to the simple life. After we begin working together, things will probably adjust themselves. No?" "No," said Dr. Jerome. "And what makes you think I'm going to work with you?" "But of course you are going to work with me, my friend," Barsac declared. "It was for this reason I asked you to come here. I appreciate your brilliance, my friend, and I need your talents badly here. I have waited for you before resuming my experiments so that we could complete the final steps together. I realize that you were shocked by what I showed you last night, but I trust your reason has prevailed over your emotions. Together we can carry this experiment to its ultimate conclusion. Up to now I have produced monstrosities and then managed to reproduce my own physical characteristics in a group of animals. I can go farther than that, I think. I have evolved a refinement of my technique. Using other animals than rats, I hope to make the changes and keep them alive. Then I can determine whether I have transmitted a portion of my mind as well as a force that changes the bodies to resemble me. You perceive the significance?" Dr. Jerome did not look as though he perceived anything except a most unpleasant prospect. He shook his head slowly. I can't," he murmured. "Wait, you misunderstand. I shall not ask you to submit to hypnosis if you do not wish to. I shall take that risk myself. All I desire is that you remain here and help to supervise the work, take notes, and act as a scientific witness to corroborate my findings." "It's no use, Barsac." Dr. Jerome did not attempt to disguise the disgust that worked in his features. "I can't stand it. I won't set foot in that laboratory again." Barsac clucked sympathetically. "You will get over your aversion," he predicted, "and, I hope, soon. For I shall now proceed with the last experiment. If it succeeds, and I know it will, you must be convinced, and if you are convinced, you can carry on alone." "Carry on? Alone?" Barsac lowered his head. The little fat man addressed the wall rather than his breakfast companion. "Yes, I am not long for this earth, my friend. The doctors, they tell me of my heart. The strain of long experimentation has taken its toll, and this last one may well prove to be the end of further work, if not the end of my life itself. No, Jerome, a man cannot give of his soul and retain life for long." Dr. Jerome stared at Barsac's earnest face. Barsac avoided his gaze and continued. "That is why I invited you and asked you to consider working with me. When I die, I wish that you will carry on my work. For the sake of our friendship, and because of my respect for your abilities and brilliance. Have no fear. Whether you choose to enter the laboratory or not, I have compiled all of the notes and data necessary for you to take over. And one more thing." Barsac's voice was quite faint. "I have made the other arrangements. I have seen my advocate and prepared my will. You will be left everything when I die. My entire estate goes to you to continue in this work." Jerome rose. "It's no use," he said. "I won't go into that laboratory with you." "Very well, I understand. But this I ask of you. Please stay here with me during the next 2 days. I shall proceed at once with the operations I have in mind. I hope to be able to give you complete proof of success. Living animals that will not only bear a physical resemblance to me, but inherit my mental processes as well." Dr. Jerome shuddered slightly. "Please," said Barsac, do not leave me during these next 2 days. I shall stay in the laboratory and work if you will prepare the meals. You understand, I cannot keep servants here. They are ignorant, superstitious fools, easily frightened, and I must have someone here to rely on. You will stay?" Jerome was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Yes," he whispered, "I will stay." Barsac clasped his hand. Dr. Jerome felt the cold, flabby fingers and drew back involuntarily. To him, the light of gratitude in Barsac's bulging eyes was too reminiscent of the look he had glimpsed there in his dreams. "I shall not wait," Barsac promised. "I go now to prepare. I will be in the laboratory. You need only to bring meals to the outer door. Within 48 hours, I hope to announce success. Meanwhile, you are at liberty to amuse yourself as you will." He turned. "I will leave you now. My gratitude, Jerome." Barsac left the room. Dr. Jerome smiled grimly as he gazed up at the forbidding stone ceiling. "Amuse myself as I will," he muttered. He finished his cigar, then rose and walked aimlessly down the hall. His footsteps rang eerily through the empty corridors. At a turn in the hall, Jerome saw the figure standing against the wall in the shadows, and started back. Then he recognized the outlines of a suit of armor. Of course, Castle Barsac would have suits of armor, and all the trimmings too. Perhaps he could amuse himself for a few hours exploring the castle. Dr. Jerome set about his explorations with scientific precision. He covered the ground floor thoroughly, entering a score of dusty chambers and apartments, being careful in each instance to turn on the lights before venturing into a strange room. He found much to interest and delight him: massive Regency furniture, elaborate tapestries, a full gallery of oils. The family portraits of the Barsac line gazed down austerely from a long chamber at the rear of the castle, and Jerome speculated as to the identity of that great-great-grandfather with the sorcerous proclivities. Everything hinted of great age and great wealth. If the castle were haunted, it was haunted by the past alone. Again, Jerome was reminded of the storybook atmosphere. All that was needed was a family vault in the cellar. A vault. Why not? Jerome explored. He discovered the stairs that descended to the lower levels, and here he found the catacombs. Catacombs they were in truth. On marble slabs lay the stone sarcophagi of the Barsacs. Row on row they rested in eternal slumber here below. Now only Sebastian Barsac remained, the last of his line, and soon he too would join these ranks of the dead. The last of the Barsacs, and he was mad, and soon to die. How soon? There, in the dank and silent catacombs, the thought came to Jerome. He could die quite soon. Why not? Let him die soon and quietly. Then there would no longer be a Castle Barsac. Jerome would have the castle, have the laboratory, have the money, and why not? Barsac was mad, and he was all alone. The doctors had said he would die, and it need hardly be called murder. Perhaps a strong shock would do it. Yes, a shock. Barsac would weaken himself in these crazy experiments, and then it would be so easy to precipitate a stroke, a seizure. He could be frightened. The will was made, and all that remained was the deed. Mad Barsac would lie here on the last empty slab, and it would be ended. Dr. Jerome ascended the stairs slowly. He went out and walked through the hills, returning only at dusk. He had wrestled with temptation and put it aside. There was no thought of putting poison in the food he took upstairs at dinner. He left the tray outside the laboratory door and knocked. He descended quickly before Barsac opened the door and ate a solitary supper in the great castle kitchen below. He was resigned to waiting now. After all, in a few weeks, Barsac might die a natural death. meanwhile let his work go on. Perhaps he might succeed. Jerome listened to the reverberation from the laboratory above his head. A steady humming sounded, accompanied by a rhythmic pulsing. Barsac must be in his cabinet now, working the focal prism and hypnotizing himself and his animals. Dr. Jerome wondered what sort of animals he was using in these improved experiments. On second thought, he didn't care to know. The vibrations were beginning to affect his nerves. He decided to turn in early. One more day, and it would be over. If he could get a good night's sleep now, his morbid fancies would vanish. Accordingly, Jerome ascended to bed, switching off the lights as he proceeded down the hall. He undressed, donned pajamas, plunged the castle bedroom into darkness, and sought sleep. Sleep came. And then Barsac came. He wheeled in the cabinet, the great metal cabinet, and once again his bright eyes caught and captured Jerome's astonished stare. Jerome's will slipped away, and he entered the cabinet. He was clamped into the seat as a prisoner is clamped in the electric chair. Like a prisoner, Jerome knew he was facing the execution of a death sentence. Yet his will was a prisoner, and now, as Barsac turned the dials, his soul was imprisoned too. Jerome stared through the great glass prism that loomed before his eyes. He could not look away, but the gigantic lens was in itself a hypnotic agent, pulling at his retina, impelling him to gaze ahead into the hugely magnified world of the focal field. He waited for the animals to appear in the field, but there were no animals. There was only Barsac. For suddenly a great face loomed through the glass, a monstrous face with the bulging eyes of Barsac and the great domed forehead. Barsac was smiling, and his yellow teeth were exposed, but Jerome could only see the eyes that glared and pulled at his own eyes, at his brain behind them, pulled his being into the glass. For as the humming rose insanely about him, Dr. Jerome felt himself plunging forward. His body was clamped to the seat, but his soul soared through the weird prism and lost itself in Barsac's mad eyes. Dr. Jerome awoke. It was daylight at last, but he did not sit up to greet its coming. He felt weak, drained. A dreadful suspicion was forming in Jerome's mind. He knew that he had dreamed, but he did not know what he hadn't dreamed. Could it be that there was a distorted truth in his symbolic nightmare? Was Barsac lying to him? Perhaps his machine could drain some of the vital essence from a man's soul. Perhaps Barsac wanted him to assist in the experiments so that a part of his soul would be removed, not to be incorporated into animals, but into Barsac. Hypnotic scientific vampirism. Had Barsac been in this room last night while he slept and dreamed, had Barsac hypnotized him in his sleep, seeking to snare his soul, something had happened. Jerome felt weak. And then he was strong with sudden purpose. The thoughts of yesterday came back, but they came now as a resolution. He would kill Barsac today. He would kill him before he died himself. He would kill Barsac because he was a madman, because his experiments were blasphemous, because he deserved to die. Dr. Jerome would kill Barsac for the sake of science. That was it, for the sake of science. Dr. Jerome rose, dressed, prepared breakfast, took Barsac's tray upstairs, returned to the castle chambers below, and began to plan anew. Madman or genius, Barsac would die. He had to die. Suppose he were really doing what he claimed. Suppose he actually managed to create animals with human physical attributes and with human minds like Barsac's mind. Wouldn't that be the ultimate horror, and shouldn't that horror be avoided, stamped out? Of course, he, Jerome, would save humanity from this monstrous affront to the laws of life. He would do the deed as he had planned, by shock, tonight. Yes, tonight. he'd short the electrical current in the castle, go up to the laboratory in the dark, and shock Barsac to death. Never lay a hand on him. A simple plan, and it would succeed. It must succeed. Jerome knew it must succeed by late afternoon, for when the vibrations sounded from above, he realized he couldn't wait much longer. He couldn't stand the sound or the visions it conjured up. Barsac draining his soul into the bodies of a horde of animals. It was impossible to bear the thought. What were the animals? Not rats, he had said that. Jerome remembered the rats. Barsac had refused to show him the other monstrosities. He only showed the rats with the deformed paws. The paws with the missing finger or missing claw. Jerome prepared dinner and laughed. His apprehensions faded away with the memory of his dream. The paws. Of course. How foolish he was, letting Barsac's crazy talk and the morbid atmosphere of the castle affect him. Because of that and a few bad dreams, he'd tricked himself into swallowing the grotesque claims of an obvious lunatic. There was a machine, but any lunatic, given the funds and a scientific training, can build an imposing machine. That didn't prove that it actually worked as Barsac claimed it did. There had been no other monstrosities for Jerome to see, for they didn't exist. Barsac's talk about previous experiments was merely talk. There were the rats, but what of it? Barsac had been cunning. He had taken 20 rats, killed them, and removed their individual claws on the left forepaws. That was all there was to it. Barsac was crazy, and there was nothing to fear. Dr. Jerome laughed again. That made it easier. He would kill the madman and take over. No more nightmares, no more fears. His laughter blended with the thunder. A storm was breaking. It shattered in fury over the castle, and the rumbling swallowed the noise of the vibrations from the laboratory upstairs. Jerome peered out of the window as jagged lightning slithered between the mountain crags. The thunder grew louder. Dr. Jerome turned back to get Barsac's tray ready. Then he paused. "Why bother?" he whispered. Yes. Why bother? Why wait any longer? He'd go upstairs now, shut off all the lights, knock on the laboratory door. Barsac would appear, expecting his dinner tray. Instead, he'd dine on death. Yes, he'd do it now, while the resolution held. As the thunder mounted, Dr. Jerome walked up the stairs on his grim errand. Lightning flickered as he reached the second landing. Jerome moved toward the switch panel on the wall. Then came the blinding bolt, and as thunder followed, the lights went out. The storm had struck. It was an omen. Jerome exulted. Now he moved up the spiral staircase leading to the laboratory landing at the top of the great castle tower. He groped his way slowly in utter darkness, tensing himself for the moment when he would reach the oaken door and knock. Then he listened, above the howling of the storm, for the vibrations from behind the door. They had ceased abruptly when the lightning struck. Jerome reached the top of the stairway. He edged toward the door. He was ready now. The door opened swiftly. Dr. Jerome heard Barsac's labored breathing. "Jerome!" called Barsac. The voice was faint, but filled with overtones of triumph. "Jerome, where are you? I've succeeded! Jerome, I've succeeded beyond my wildest dreams!" Jerome was very glad Barsac had called out. It enabled him to locate Barsac's body in the darkness. Now he glided forward and brought his cold hands up to Barsac's neck. Sudden shock of fright. But Barsac did not scream with fear. He screamed with anger. "Jerome, it's you!" he shouted. So he knew. Jerome meant to kill him. Therefore he must die. Jerome's hands, which had risen merely to frighten, now remained to strangle. He tightened his grip about Barsac's throat. Barsac tried to claw him off, but he could not see, and his gestures were pitifully weak. Now Barsac did not cry out. He merely gurgled as Dr. Jerome pressed his windpipe and then dragged him back along the corridor. He dragged him swiftly, purposefully, and with his own feet he felt for the edge of the great staircase. Then he thrust Barsac forward. There was a single shriek as Sebastian Barsac reeled in the darkness, and then only a dreadful series of rubbery thumps as he plunged down the black well of the spiral staircase. Dr. Jerome stood there as the thunder came again. When its muttering reverberation died away, the thumping had ended. Barsac was at the bottom of the stairs. Cautiously, Dr. Jerome descended the staircase. His feet groped for the next stair, and groped for the feel of Barsac's body. But it was not until he reached the bottom that his shoes met the resistant flesh of Barsac. Jerome knelt and passed his hands over that flesh, finding it quite cold as death. So it was done. Barsac was dead. Long live the new ruler of Castle Barsac. Dr. Jerome straightened up with a grin. It was easy, after all. Gentlemen, it was an unavoidable accident. Sebastian Barsac was at work in his laboratory when the lights went out. He came out into the hall, evidently with the purpose of descending the stairs. In the dark, he must have made a misstep and fallen down the staircase. He whispered the words aloud, just the way he meant to repeat them at the inquest. He heard their echoes rustle and die away. And then he heard the other rustling. It came from far overhead, from a room at the top of the stairs. A room at the top of the stairs, a rustling from the laboratory. Jerome bounded up the stairs. The animals were loose. He'd better lock the laboratory door at once. He heard the shrill squeaking as he made the second landing and turned to climb the last flight to the tower. Then he paused, for there was a drumming from the floor above, a patting and a scraping as small bodies moved down the hall. They had already left the laboratory. For the first time, he detected the ominous note in the squeaking sounds. Shrill little cries of anger resounded from the head of the stairs. They were angry, as Barsac had been angry when he had died. Barsac, who had come out, crowing in triumph that his experiments were successful beyond his wildest dreams. His experiments were successful! I will transfer the physical attributes of myself, and also the mental attributes. Jerome knew the meaning of fear then. The creatures of Barsac's experiments were loose. The creatures whose bodies he had changed, whose minds were a part of Barsac's mind. They knew, and they were loose and coming after him to seek revenge. Jerome heard them creeping down the stairway. They were after him. They knew he was there. They could see in the dark. He turned in blind panic down the hallway. He'd hide in his room. That was it, his room. He stumbled through the pitch-black corridor and heard them at his heels. The beasts were swift. He reached the door, groped for his key. He fumbled in his pockets, cursing. The key wasn't on his ring, and the door was locked. Perhaps he'd dropped it now, dropped it on the floor, and stooped to feel around. And his hand encountered the warmth of flesh. Flesh that was furry, but not furry enough, flesh that wriggled through his fingers. The creatures had come. Fangs nipped at his thumb. He stood up hastily and kicked out at the furry beast. But another body brushed his other ankle, and then they were all around him. Their squealing rose. One of the tiny monstrosities was crawling up his leg, and he felt the touch of minute fingers clinging to his body. Jerome screamed and knew Barsac had spoken the truth. The monsters he had created with his mind were going to kill him in revenge for Barsac's death, and there was no escape. Their squealing filled the corridor, and their bodies blocked it completely. They swarmed around Dr. Jerome like ravening rats, but they were not rats. Jerome knew that if he could see them, he would go mad. And if he did not see them, they would crawl up his body and sink their horrible little mouths in his throat, stroke his face with their ghastly fingers. Jerome wheeled and charged down the corridor again. The nightmare ranks broke for a moment, and he sped down the black corridor of the haunted castle with the beasts of Barsac at his heels. He was playing tag with death in a nighted lair, and death ran behind him on purposeful paws. Death squealed and chattered, and Jerome fled. He had to get out before they reached him, touched him, took him. He had to. Gasping in agony, he reached the corridor's end, knowing that the horde was keeping pace. He turned again, ran forward. He never gave a thought to the stairs. And then, as the squealing rose and echoed in his ears, Dr. Jerome tumbled down the castle staircase and landed with a sickening little crunch that he never heard. His head lolled grotesquely on the broken stem of a neck. He lay next to the body of Sebastian Barsac, and like Barsac, he was quite dead. It was casual irony that chose this moment for the castle lights to flicker on again. They revealed nothing but the two bodies lying at the foot of the stairs. Mad Barsac lay dead, and so did Mad Jerome. On the landing above, the 20 escaped guinea pigs blinked down with stupid, uncomprehending eyes.